Hello, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, the Israeli defense minister gets in a major scuffle with France. Israel is on high alert as a Hezbollah terror organization increases its missile arsenal, and it looks like winter is finally having its way with the Holy Land. I'm Natasha Kirchek here with the latest news in Israel. Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman is ruffling French diplomatic circles today by comparing the upcoming Paris Peace Conference on the Middle East to the Dreyfus affair.
You may remember that back in 1894, a French Jewish military officer named Alfred Dreyfus was wrongfully convicted of treason, in a matter the state later attributed entirely to anti-Semitism. Dreyfus was fully exonerated in 1906. The Israeli defense chief says that the January 15th summit in Paris will be a modern version of the Dreyfus case, except that instead of one Jew in the defendant's chair, the entire nation of Israel will be put on trial. Jerusalem is refusing to attend out of the conviction that only direct negotiations with the Palestinians can resolve the conflict. French foreign ministry officials are denying the comparison and say they only want to reaffirm the international commitment to a two-state solution. The Palestinians will be sending a representative to the meeting along with envoys from about 25 countries. By the way, the Dreyfus trial was attended by Theodor Herzl, who's considered the father of Zionism. His shock at hearing crowds screaming "death to the Jews" prompted him to work toward the creation of a Jewish homeland that ultimately led to the refounding of the State of Israel in 1948.
Well, it certainly seems like Israel is not going to be changing its mind anytime soon about the France Peace Conference. All right, moving on, guys. The Hezbollah terror organization has recently been bolstering its military strength with the help of its Middle East partners. This is now sparking an arms race by causing Israel to believe it should also acquire more missiles to counter the rising threat from Lebanon.
Intelligence indicates that in addition to 100,000 short-range rockets, Hezbollah now has Syrian Scuds that can strike 435 miles into Israeli territory. The terror group even allegedly has several kinds of ballistic missiles with 155-mile ranges, and Iranian Zilzals capable of striking 124 miles away. This deadly arsenal is stashed just over Israel's northern border, and it's making defense officials very nervous. They're now considering the bolstering of their own supplies with the extra rocket mobile system capable of accurately delivering 265-pound warheads 93 miles away. They also plan to acquire the LoRa surface-to-surface missile that has a 186-mile range and is able to carry payloads of up to 1,323 pounds. Both weapons are produced by Israeli firms. The Army's ultimate goal is to have a rocket battalion in every division for defense of the Jewish state, while the Air Force is engaged in operations elsewhere. While Hezbollah poses the most significant threat, there are also rising concerns over the Hamas terror group, which has also been expanding the size of its own missile cache just over Israel's southern border.
It looks like there's been a resurgence of home building in Jerusalem since Donald Trump was elected U.S. president last month. Aaron, what is it about Trump's election that is making it so that Israelis are starting to build so much more?
Well, for the last decade or so, Israelis have been, really trying not to build as much as possible in respect to a future possible Palestinian border. But with the peace process the way it is, and with, Trump and his administration being seen as very pro-Israel, at least for now, they're trying another way.
There was already a slight rise before the American balloting, but now there's been a real spike in the number of proposals being considered for new Jewish housing on the east side of the city. 1,506 housing units have been approved so far this year, compared to only 395 in 2015 and 775 the year before that. Tomorrow, the Planning Committee is expected to greenlight a whopping 618 more homes. All of the building will take place across the 1967 lines, which Israel views as part of its united capital, but is condemned by much of the international community. The Jerusalem municipality insists that the expansion is similar to the natural growth seen in any city, so young people can find places to live and build their future. The latest permits aren't related to the pushback against the controversial UN resolution that was just passed by the Security Council, because these specific plans had already been submitted for approval before the vote.
Clearly, Israeli news can't get enough with construction in both the West Bank and Jerusalem. Speaking of which, there's been more fallout over the UN resolution condemning Israeli West Bank construction. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just ordered the suspension of all cooperation and international development with the African nation of Angola for supporting the passage of the anti-Israel resolution.
The move is largely symbolic because joint activity with the Republic isn't really all that substantial. But Jerusalem is particularly upset and disappointed with the oil-rich country because Angolan diplomats actually went back on their earlier promises to abstain rather than vote in favor of the bill. But Jerusalem is particularly upset and disappointed with the oil-rich country because Angolan diplomats actually went back on their earlier promises to abstain rather than vote in favor of the bill, which they did. And somewhat adding insult to injury, the Angolan ambassador was ticketed for parking illegally when called to Jerusalem to be formally reprimanded over his country's actions. Other retaliatory acts include Netanyahu's declaration that he won't be meeting with British Prime Minister Theresa May on the sidelines of the Davos Economic Forum in January. The Israeli ambassadors to New Zealand and Senegal have been ordered home, and the entire diplomatic corps has been forbidden to visit any of the 14 countries which supported the bill, or to hold talks with any of their envoys.
Sharp disagreements between Washington and Jerusalem have risen to the surface in recent days, but Times of Israel editor David Horowitz tells ILTV's Steve Leibowitz that the changes when Trump comes to office are still hard to predict.
Nothing is quite as certain. Do I think that David Friedman is likely to be the ambassador? Absolutely. Do I think it's probable that the embassy will move, that Trump wants to move the embassy? I think so. But I think that the absent political history of the incoming president and lots of the people around him mean that nobody should get too carried away. When things have actually happened, we'll believe that they've happened. But this is, I don't know if it's unprecedented, very, very rare to be going through a transition where you can't quite be sure how lots of things are going to play out.
Have you gotten a sense from readership, from diaspora Jewry, especially diaspora Jewry in the United States, that they have actually accepted and internalized the concept that Donald Trump is going to be the president?
Well, a proportion of them have. I mean, I think increasingly people have. The question is how they feel about it. So I was just in the States, for example, and obviously I'm in Israel, almost all of my life. There is no middle ground here. That's the most striking thing. For some people, if we're talking about Israelis, and most especially because it's most acute, Jewish Americans, Jews in America, it's either, for some of them, it's the most wonderful thing that has happened, or it's an absolute, terrible disaster. And there is indifference, of course not, and middle ground, really. It's so polarizing. And you understand lots of the forces. I'm sure other people have talked about it at immense length, why the vote went the way that it did. The pendulum swinging. It wouldn't have happened were it not for the 2 terms of Obama and the nature of the candidate who the Democrats were putting up. But this is a real earthquake, and are people starting to come to terms with it? They're starting to realize that it's going to happen. But what I don't see is any great blunting of corners here. In other words, that people are, changing or adapting and so on. It's either wonderful because this is what you wanted to happen, or it's a disaster. And I suspect that that's going to be with us for a long time, that sense of delight or horror.
Ron Dermer, the Israeli ambassador in Washington, had contact with the Trump administration, the incoming administration, and he's even giving them some advice, advising them, yes, to move forward with moving the embassy and so on. You also have had recent conversations, you and your staff, with Prime Minister Netanyahu. What did you hear from him about his anticipation ahead of the Trump coming into office?
Well, let me separate between the fact that the Prime Minister has recently started giving lots of time to various Israeli media outlets, and we're allowed to acknowledge that we spent a fair amount of time. Times of Israel's editorial operation was invited to the Prime Minister's office, and we had a lot of time with the Prime Minister.
Over 2 hours.
Yeah, well, considerably over 2 hours. But we're not supposed to talk about the content of what he said. These are things we now know that the Prime Minister thinks and believes, but the framework was off the record. Beyond that, Netanyahu is on the record, for example, on the embassy, as saying, great, you rightly say the ambassador, Netanyahu's very close aide, Ron Dermer, has publicly also said, let's do it. Trump has said that he wants to try and do this most impossible of all deals, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If he can solve that, if that is to be a focus for him, it will be interesting to see how moving the embassy fits in. And why do I say that? Because I was actually doing a conference call the other day where the two speakers were Saeb Erekat, who's the chief Palestinian PLO negotiator, and me. And I made it pretty clear in this conference call, I'm just a journalist here, I'm not a policymaker. But in that call, Saeb Erekat, threatened, the diplomatic apocalypse. The PLO will revoke its recognition of Israel if they move the embassy. He said America will not be able to sustain embassies in the Arab world because the Arab public will not tolerate them, will not allow them to operate if the American administration moves the embassy. Now, Saeb Erekat is a man sometimes given to hyperbole. But there's no doubt that there will be very bitter reactions, to put it mildly. If you're trying to do a deal, is moving the embassy the way to keep the Palestinians in the room with you? You'd think that those would be some of the considerations. The Prime Minister clearly thinks that this will be good, that this will underline that things have changed, and that he's still committed to a two-state solution. He doesn't want a binational state. He most certainly thinks, hey, this is Jerusalem. We have a 3,000-year history here. This is our capital, and the terrible situation is that there's not a single country on earth that recognizes that. The last embassies left not too long ago, the El Salvadors and the Costa Ricas. There's no international embassy in Jerusalem now. And Netanyahu absolutely, adamantly, and never mind the consequences, I think he would say, this is our capital, and it's about time that America and everybody else acknowledge that.
David Horowitz, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
One of the toughest things about aging for many of us is losing our senses, and for some, sight is both the worst and first to go. Well, one Israeli biotechnology company has come up with a tremendous therapy to hopefully put an end to such problems in the future. Joining me today is Dr. Charles Irving, PhD, the CEO of CellCure Neurosciences, to fill in the rest.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So to begin, what does CellCure do? Can you break this down for us in the most easy way possible?
Okay. CellCure produces cells which will be used to transplant into the retina of the eye to replace cells which are degrading and degenerating because of age. And this is to treat the leading cause of visual impairment in elderly patients, and the disease is called dry form age-related macular degeneration. And it's a leading cause of visual impairment in persons over 55 years of age.
Right. I mean, this is one of the major, I don't know if diseases is the word, but ailments to affect people around the world, right? Not only in the United States, this is taking place here in Israel as well.
One of the major diseases of
disease
aging.
Is the right word?
Right.
Wasn't sure.
It's a disease of aging, and it's one of the things that baby boomers like me have to look forward to.
Well, we all have to look forward to that one day, unfortunately.
Right.
So, so what inspired your focus on creating this treatment?
Well, it came from a combination of factors. First of all, Israel is a leading center in the use of stem cells to produce cells which have therapeutic value. And we came and I was involved with the group of Professor Benny Rubinoff at Hadassah Ein Kerem Hospital, and he has a center, Human Embryonic Stem Cell Research Institute, and they were expert at developing various processes to convert stem cells into the various type of cells in the body. We have 220 different types of cells in the body, and if you give the right signals at the right time, you can steer one of these stem cells into that particular type of cell you want. And then he was in collaboration with Professor Eyal Banin, who's the head of the macular degeneration unit of the Department of Ophthalmology at Hadassah. So there was a need, and there was a way to fulfill this need.
Now, talking about stem cells specifically, the use of stem cells has been a touchy subject for some. Questions of ethical practice have commonly become one of the bigger arguments. Where do you guys get your stem cells from, or your cells from?
Okay. First of all, we don't put stem cells into the body. We use only a small number of stem cells as starting material for the synthesis or the derivation of therapeutic cells, because they have a natural tendency and they want to divide and to differentiate to a particular type of cell. We are dealing with a type of stem cell, which is maybe the most controversial, but it really has the most potential from all the stem cells. And it's a human embryonic stem cell. It's derived from leftover blastocysts from IVF clinics, and the couples already have several children, and they aren't going to use any more of these. And these are just left in the cold liquid nitrogen year after year. And some of the parents and the couples donate their cells for medical research and also for commercialization at no cost.
Okay.
To us, and that's where our cells come from. They are about 3 or 4 days old when they're frozen, and then these cells really have no possibility of being implanted into the mother anymore because she's finished, and they're not the highest quality cells, so they're left over. And after 10 to 15 years, these cells can then be used for that purpose.
Interesting. Now, where can we find your products on the market? Are they available yet?
No, our product is in the development stage. It's past the preclinical development stage, and it's now in clinical trials at the moment in 3 hospitals in Israel, and will soon also be used in 2 hospitals, at least in the United States.
Well, it's a big deal, and it shows a collaboration, obviously, between Israel and the United States as well.
Yes. We were very fortunate that as this project was first starting, and Israel was a leading country for stem cell development, from the very beginning of the field in 2000 and on, and it had more papers than many of the other countries, and it was a leader. And then there was a U.S. company called Biotech, Inc., which is located in San Francisco, which also was a leader in stem cells and so forth, and had set up several companies. So they saw this possibility, and we saw it, and they bring to us expertise, know-how. We bring particular expertise and a real product, which we can develop from stem cells. And of course, they're a public company, so they can raise funds much more easily than a startup. So we rely on them for both funding and for marketing.
So what's next for CellCure?
Well, this is a product, it takes very long to develop medical products. We're in a phase called phase 1-2, which is primarily to determine the safety of this product. And the next step is to show the efficacy. Once we do this, then we can move on to other products. The type of cell which we're developing now, which is called a retinal pigment epithelial cell, a long word, but we call it for short RPE, it is the cell which takes care of the photoreceptors. What happens when the RPE cells get old and can't keep up with all the demands of the photoreceptors, they die off, and a short time afterwards, the photoreceptor cells also die off. And the photoreceptor cells are responsible for collecting the light and processing it, then triggering a signal to the brain. So the first product is these RPE cells, which are like the caretaker cells. And if we can replace them in time, we can spare the photoreceptor cells. The next product is actually to replace the photoreceptor cells themselves for another set of diseases. that caused them to die off early. And of course, the ultimate challenge is, is replacing some of the nerve cells, the ganglion cells, which die in diseases such as glaucoma. Wow. So we look at this as like fruit on a tree. So the RPE cells are the low-hanging fruit, the photoreceptor cells are the middle-hanging, and at the very top of the tree there will be the ganglion cells for other diseases. So we have a possibility of treating all retinal diseases. And what's amazing is that this is a major disease and there is no treatment for it. For dry form age-related macular degeneration, there is no FDA-approved treatment.
So it looks you guys are really on a path to, helping millions of people with one of the most common diseases that exists right now on the planet. Congratulations on the work that you're doing, and I think we're excited to see what happens.
Thank you, and we'll look forward to come back and report on future developments.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Speaking of trying to stay healthy, most Israelis were pretty bundled up in warm clothing today to protect themselves from the major winter storm that's affecting most of the country. Aaron, what did you do to my sunshine? It's been raining all day here. I don't think I've ever worn such heavy jackets in Israel before.
I have nothing to do with it. I swear I didn't do it. If it were up to me, I would turn the heat up for sure. But no, I think, if we look at it in a positive light, that, we're replenishing the well, I think that'd be better for all of us.
Absolutely. There is certainly enough water right now to be replenishing the well and the Sea of Galilee, hopefully. Right?
Hopefully, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Forecasters say this is likely to be the rainiest day all week, even though we've already received a great deal of much-needed precipitation. Thunderstorms pounded northern and central Israel this afternoon, and the coastal highway was closed to traffic because of flooding. Other flash flood warnings have been issued for the Judean desert, around the Dead Sea, and even the northern Negev region. It's been icy cold, too, as temperatures dipped to much chillier levels than normal for this time of year. Skiers and winter sports enthusiasts are happy, though, since snow is falling on the slopes of Mount Hermon and mountain peaks throughout the Golan Heights that's turning the entire area into a sparkling winter wonderland.
I don't love the cold winter weather myself, but it might be time for me to take a trip to the north and check out the skiing. Now, moving on, many people don't associate Israel with baseball, but you'd be surprised just how much excitement there is ahead of the World Baseball Classic. For the first time, there's going to be 10 American Jewish Major League Baseball players on the Israeli team.
These U.S. athletes are now preparing to be in Israel next month, so they can start training for the international competition. They're entitled to represent Israel because the Classic's guidelines permit anyone eligible for citizenship of a country to play on its national team. Even though it was possible, the initiative was never implemented until now. The Americans are bringing their wives and children on the trip, which will include visits to the greatest destinations the country has to offer, such as the Jerusalem holy sites, Masada and the Dead Sea. The players will also be making time to meet with some of the younger participants in the Israeli Association of Baseball, as part of greater efforts to attract even more enthusiasm for the sport. The IAB president says this is clearly the most impressive Jewish baseball team ever assembled. So don't forget to tune into the World Baseball Classic tournament in Seoul, South Korea on March 6th, and be sure to cheer for Team Israel.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day. You know what they say, when it rains, it pours. And that's exactly how we've been feeling here in Israel under the last few days of exaggerated rainfall. So today's word of the day is le'agzim, or to exaggerate. A lot of things here in Israel, as in many other places, are mugzam, or exaggerated. If you're in a touristy area, you might find mechirim mugzamim, or excessive prices in the shops. If your friend is telling a story and the plot seems a little too grand, you might say al tagzim, or don't exaggerate. And of course, maybe that friend speaks too excessively to begin with, or be'ofen mugzam. Just try to be careful with how you use le'agzim, though. You wouldn't want to be accused of exaggerating yourself. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast.
ILTV's weather forecast is sponsored by Adopt a Savta, taking care of Israel's lonely Holocaust survivors.
Tonight should be partly cloudy with isolated showers and a low of 48 or 9 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow you can expect scattered rains and the temperatures to rise a little bit but remain cold with a high of 60 or 16 degrees Celsius. All right, everybody, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.84 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iotv.tv. Thanks for watching and see you tonight.